welcome to another episode of AudioCodes UC Talks. I'm Scott Middlebrooks, and I'm joined by my colleagues Jason Wyatt.
Hi.
Shane Huey.
G'day.
See, I gave you guys some time to say your hellos this morning. For me, afternoon, evening, and of course we're joined by our special guest star this week, Jared Ambrose.
Hello. Hi, Jared.
Hey guys.
Today we're going to talk about one of the keys to a successful UC rollout, project management. Jared is a project manager here in our North American professional services team and is here to lend his expertise to today's topic. Jared, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey as a project manager.
Sure, and thanks for having me. I kind of came into project management throughout my career by necessity in some ways, working numerous types of roles. Both as an entrepreneur with startups, large companies. I found myself coming back to project management to help my other responsibilities, if that makes sense. So after about 10 or 15 years of realizing how important project management is on so many facets of business, I kind of landed in that role formally. I went on to get my PMP, and I've since worked on other things like larger programs and even some product management. So I find that blending it all together really helps with the project management skills and efforts.
Great, thanks, Jared. So in my experience, in UC projects, which has been my entire career, a good project manager is critical to keeping a project on the rails, keeping it on scope, in budget, on time. Jason, what has been your experience as far as having project manager, either a project manager or maybe no project manager, or project managers of various experience on projects?
I think in pulling directly from my last role, when we had a project manager involved, everything would run smoothly. And, the times where that project manager would either leave the organization halfway through a project and then somebody else would come on board, or there'd be a big gap, that's when there'd be a huge hole in the project delivery because nobody really understood or knew what was going on. And you kind of lost that continuity that you have, which I think a project manager brings to the table, especially when they're sort of involved from sort of the early inception right through to, the user acceptance testing and then delivery to the end customer.
For sure. Yeah, you definitely brought up something that I hadn't thought of, but and Jared, maybe you have a comment on this, that the project manager is generally the point of contact within a project, and it allows us to bring to bear various expertises, technical expertises to the project without a change in project contact. Shane, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, with project managers, I've always had a love-hate relationship with product managers, and I think that's just the technical person incoming out of here, because project managers are about getting the project delivered, and that's what they do really well. If it was left up to me as a technical person, I would get stuck on the smallest little funnest, geekiest bit of thing that, how cool is this? I could do this. When in the realms of the project, it's not important. And that's where I think, and that's why I was saying a love-hate relationship with project managers, with project managers, is because they just keep the project driving. And if there isn't a project manager, those projects just drag on and on and on. And, it's indispensable. And I think some of the big projects, and I think the first time I worked, one of the first projects I was on was a large scale link deployment, and it had a PM, and he was just on you every day. Have you done this? Have you done that? Have you done this? Have you done that? And the project got delivered on time, on budget, actually got delivered before, and the customer was there just going, we can't believe it got on time, on budget. And it's because
somebody
of the
was
project
actually
manager.
able to manage you, Shane.
Yeah, someone
you
is
on the rails.
It's hard. It's hard. It's difficult.
Well,
but
I
yeah,
think
Yeah, I was
well,
going to say,
say,
and
Shane, I
that's
think the what we see is that project management has to occur in all these projects, the activities, the tracking, the organization, development of timeline, holding people to the timeline. As you mentioned, hopefully you don't have to call someone every day, but if it's laid out and detailed, then we know the project can flow and hopefully be delivered on time. So whether you have a defined project manager or someone in a project lead kind of role, project coordinator even, the project management still has to occur, right? So it could be the technical person that's having to pick it up. It could fall more on the customer side. It could be other team members that are making it happen. But with a defined project manager, a lot of those things can come together more quickly and with a lot more cohesion.
Yeah, and from my point of view too, the good thing about the project manager is that I'm not very good on the repetition, and like I'll go and fix a problem, and I'm like, I've been spent the last 2-3 hours going through logs trying to fix something. The last thing I want to then do is turn around and do a detailed, this is what I did today type email, and that's where the project manager really is gold, because they just can keep ticking that over. Over here, Mitch in Australia, he's we work really well together. He handles all the customers, the queries, and I'll be at the back end, and that's what I love, and it's really works really well for us. So
I think that's an important point that you picked up there, Shane. That from a customer perspective, a project manager provides continuity to the customer, and I think that's the key thing. It gives them the one person, one throat to choke, and I hate that saying, but it absolutely does. When you've got lots of people coming in and out of projects doing the bits they've got to do, when there's continuity, I think that's what comes across as being or elevates the professionalism of the service.
Yeah,
the phrase that I like to use, Jay, is one back to pat.
Nice. Okay.
That's what our
I'll
project
remember that
managers do. Is they drive us to success.
Yes.
Which leads me to kind of my next question, Jared, is talk to us a little bit about how your involvement with AudioCodes and how AudioCodes, the methodology that AudioCodes uses for project management, and what are the kind of the key points that you're driving within a project?
Sure. So it's pretty standard project management methodology, right? We would get a service order in, determine what the customer's purchased, what's in scope, and then do an intro call, develop a kickoff call where we laid out reviewing the scope and all the parts and pieces of how AudioCodes will engage. And then from that, a timeline and as needed, a detailed project plan. We like to keep it lightweight, somewhat agile, if you will, in our approach, because what we find is, as with any good project, once you dig in and start actually executing, you might learn some things that will change some of the timeline, and if you have to go with change requests or just an understanding of what the scope has defined, we try to stay flexible and agile in that regard. So it's fairly standard project management methodology. We do a number of pilot programs and proof of concept projects these days, as you can imagine, as more folks are moving toward these unified platforms. And so there we need to be even as more flexible, right? And be able to adjust and understand that while we need a successful pilot, we also need the outcomes from that pilot to tell us how can we be successful in a larger, bigger rollout, bigger project. Good
point. Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we at least here in North America, and Shane, you and Jay can kind of pitch in your thoughts or your experiences there in other regions of the world. But Jared, here in the U.S., we assign a PM for every single project that we run. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct. I mean, unless the customer's just buying an additional, unit or something that can just be the engineer could easily install that, right? But as far as any project, any rollout, we definitely want a project manager assigned. And and that can vary. Sometimes it's a lighter engagement for the project manager where it wouldn't require a detailed project plan and weekly status calls. And then sometimes it does include not just weekly status calls, but daily as needed interaction from the project manager. Just making sure the team's on track. Certainly the AudioCodes resources, but also working with a customer.
So Shane, I think you've already kind of touched on this subject, but maybe you want to, as you want to do, expand upon it a bit. Yep. Is that one of the benefits that I see for us as kind of the technical consultants is that in addition to bringing consistency to a project, a consistent point of communication, they also drive efficiencies and allow us to divide the labor up a bit, so that we're not focused on those repetitive type of projects, the kind of the budgeting, the status calls, the status reports, where the technical consultant can focus on the technical bits. Do you feel like a project manager brings those types of efficiencies for your projects?
Definitely, it's all about strengths. So I'll never pretend to be a project manager. My strengths are technical, so I love doing the technical, whereas your project manager, they love doing the PM type activities. And, if that's where their passions are, and they're going to always do that job better. And I think then as a company, we get our people, we get our strengths, and then we deliver the projects on time with a lot less what's the word I'm trying to think of? Completely lost my train of thought, but
need a project.
It's late over there. We'll give you that one.
Yeah. I'm completely It's cold too. But yeah, no. So the project manager is very, very important, and definitely over here we always have a project management component, even on the smaller jobs. It's just the amount of detail, whether it's a dedicated project manager or maybe it's just the project managers overseeing the initial job and then kicks off to the FAE, the field application engineer, and they'll do the deployment for those smaller jobs. But it's so critical.
Yeah. And Jay, I think you touched on this a bit as well, but have you ever been on a project where maybe the project got kicked off and a project manager wasn't assigned because they thought that it was going to be a small project, but then it turned into a big project? Or maybe in a previous life, at a previous company, they just didn't use PMs for everything, and you were tasked with having to keep up with everything. How did those projects go?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I in a previous life, I was technical director for a managed service provider, and whilst I had the benefit of a CEO who was who'd come from a project management background, and he would pass on all his knowledge with his methodologies and project management, we never actually had a dedicated project management team. So my responsibility would be to go out and do the project lead. But then also be prepared to pick up the tools and do some Cat5 cabling or, whatever sort of task came up to sort of, provide that infill. Moving on from that kind of role, then working for a larger, I would say a large corporate, and having, the benefit of a dedicated project management team. It was poles apart from what I used to do, I literally, from mine was just being a project lead, to understand then to see a project manager actually go through the whole kind of process. It's completely different. So would I want to go back and be a project manager or fulfill in that role? Absolutely not, because those guys know what they're doing. It's not my forte. Yes, I could probably as a stopgap, but I wouldn't want to, not really.
So like I mentioned earlier, Jared, there, one back to Pat, we're singing your praises. We even though we may not to say it on a daily basis, we appreciate you and the functions that PMO provides to us as technical consultants. As we were preparing for this episode, one of the other keys that you pointed out that I thought was a really important observation was that, and we've been talking about having a project manager on the audio code side, but how important it is to have a counterpart for you to liaise with on the customer side. Can you tell us a little bit about how, how important that is, and what your interactions look like when they don't have a project manager versus when they do have a project manager that you're talking to on the kind of the other side of the equation?
Yeah, sure. And it's what you would imagine, right? I mean, with a dedicated project manager from the customer side, things tend to go more smoothly. Communication will be maintained at a much higher level, consistent level. The details just get covered, right? And it's if there are a lot of team members on the other side, for instance, one of my pilot projects with a large 25,000 person company right now, we're doing 200 pilot users moving over to Microsoft Teams with direct routing. Even with that smaller group, having a project manager on the customer side is crucial, because while it's a 200 user pilot program, there are about 14 team members on the project team side for the customer, right? So and I work with all 14 of them, certainly know who they are on the calls. But for me as the project manager on the audio code side, to have to maybe directly communicate with 14 people versus having a single project manager, so it's so important. And even if it's not a dedicated project manager role or someone titled as project manager, having a designated person, someone who, regardless of their role in the project or their title, but can really be a project lead for the effort. And then sometimes even when you get a person defined and they can be fairly active, it's just a matter of is this one of their top projects? Is it bubbled down the list? So. Right. But without it can be a real struggle. I mean, the projects happen. We talked earlier. I think Shane was saying, the projects drag out and they can kind of get done, but not as efficiently, for sure. So, yeah, for folks out there, if you're looking at a project coming up and you're not sure, you should assign one of your project managers, or at least make clear who in the project team is the lead and the coordinator. Please do so. It makes such a difference for not just AudioCodes, but any of your projects.
So guys, as Jared mentioned, just that importance of having a project manager on their side. I know we've all kind of had our own bumps and bruises along the way. We've all been in this industry and doing this game for a long time. Any thoughts or words of wisdom for our customers as they might be looking to take on a project, and whether or not they want a project manager or not?
So I'm going to answer this one with obviously, it depends on the scale of the organization, the size of the organization. I think the small, medium enterprises, it's probably not necessarily so important to have a dedicated project manager on the customer side of things. But, it obviously is massively helpful if there is a single point of contact. Certainly when you get into the larger enterprises in the thousands or tens of thousands of users, absolutely, it's just not possible unless you've got that one person to go to when you're trying to complete a project. It just makes it really, really difficult, especially if somebody's sort of double hatting from a day role as well as then sort of picking up the lead on the project, which is never really sort of helpful.
Great. So I really appreciate everybody's time this morning. Jared this morning, Jay this afternoon,
evening.
Shane this evening. Great conversation. Clearly, project management is a key component to a successful project. For those of us that don't live project management on a day-to-day basis, it can feel like herding cats. So we really appreciate, Jared, what you do.
Was that herding
keep
cats
us all
or
together? Trying to herd cats.
Okay.
If you ever saw the Mythbusters episode, I'm a huge Mythbusters fan, where they showed that herding cats is virtually impossible. So Jared, hats off. Kudos to you. Hats off.
We try.
So Jared, again, thanks for joining us. Jay, Shane, as always, please tune in to our listeners, to our viewers. Please listen in for our next episode, where we'll be joined by our fellow AudioCodes consultant, Eric Langer, for a discussion of lessons learned when engaging and migrating to Microsoft Teams.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thanks.
I just add that if you've liked the video, hit like. Please share the video, and don't forget, if you want to speak to any of us directly, email uctalks@audiocodes.com.
See, that's what you get for turning the reins over to me for 1 week. I forget how to close out the conversation.
No worries.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Good evening.